so easy. We're back with our special hour-long look at teens and sex. Dr. Meg Meeker is a pediatrician whose books include Epidemic, Raising Great Teens in a Toxic Sexual Culture, and Neil Bernstein is an adolescent psychologist and the author of How to Keep Your Teenager Out of Trouble and What to Do If You Can't. Hi, nice to see you both.
Hello,
Thanks so much for helping us out with this, because I thought you guys had some terrific advice. Needless to say, parents are completely freaked out when they hear these stories, and we tried to put it into perspective for them last night and really provide a launching pad for discussion with their kids. But how bad is it, Neil? And is it more perception or is it reality?
Well, it's somewhere between the two. You know, there's always an exaggeration that goes on, and on the other hand, kids don't always tell their parents the details of what they're doing.
Right.
I don't think today's youth are any worse than they were a decade ago,
really?
certainly.
It sure sounds like it.
It's out in the open more. It's
right?
like the cat's out of the bag. 20 years ago, no one talked about oral sex.
We should mention that 7 out of the 10 kids we surveyed in this very scientific poll, the first of its kind for young teens, said they were not sexually active. They pretty much kissed and, you know, maybe touched or fondled a little bit, not below the belt, but that's sort of it. But there is this casual attitude, it seems, Meg, that people that these young people feel so, first of all, I was amazed how comfortable they felt in 48 hours, just touching each other, hanging out with each other, really confiding in each other. Where does all this casualness come from about hooking up, friends with benefits, a casual attitude about oral sex? I mean, no big deal. How did this evolve?
Right, yeah. Well, you know, and everybody asked me that. Everybody asked me that. And I think that what I believe personally is I've been taking care of teenagers for about 20 years and kind of watched what's happened when you look at this research, what's happened in their culture and then what's happened medically to them from, say, 1960 to now. I really believe that it's a result of very aggressive marketing of sex to our kids from, advertisers, music industry. Everywhere they go, they're saturated with visual and auditory messages about sex. And they perceive that if they're going to be anybody, they have to be sexually active.
So it's so connected to their self-esteem.
Exactly, exactly.
And information is so much more accessible now than it used to be.
Through the internet. But
yeah,
you do hear, first of all, you hear lyrics of some of these songs. They're absolutely stunning to me.
They are.
And it's interesting, the kids I talked to said it's become almost white noise, and yet when pressed, they do admit that it does have an impact on them psychologically. One of the young men who was a part of the group said it's so important for parents to help not necessarily filter out, but provide an alternative view. In other words, you see an image and you say, how do you feel about that? Exactly. And this is a counter image. In other words, don't throw up your hands and say, ha, it's everywhere, I can't do anything about it, but use it as a discussion point. And I thought that was such a valuable and important point to make.
Yeah, and that's where good parenting communication comes in. A good parent has to enter through their child's door and take them out through their own.
So monitor what they see, but also provide some counterbalance.
And discuss it and expose them to both.
And I really talk about, I feel that a big part of my role is really encouraging parents to help their teens negotiate what I perceive now as a very toxic sexual culture.
Right. When you say epidemic, by the way, it's not an epidemic of sexual activity, but sexually transmitted diseases.
According to the CDC, they call it a hidden epidemic, but it really isn't an epidemic. And the funny thing about it's not funny, but 15 million to 18 million Americans every year get a new sexually transmitted disease, and 2/3 are under 25. So what we're seeing is a disproportionate concentration among our youth. And if you just crunch the numbers, it's between 8,000 and 10,000 teens a day.
Let me get to a couple of email questions real quickly. Jody from New Jersey writes, our biggest concern as parents, and I agree with her, is the long-term impact that hooking up and friends with benefits will have on our teens. Is there any data to suggest that this is affecting their ability to maintain significant and important serious relationships? It is such a bizarre phenomenon that you have sex or have intimacy with someone, and yet no strings attached, no commitment, and no romantic feelings. Does this have a negative impact?
Yes, it does. In fact,
or do we know yet?
Simply said, well, look, what we've studied is promiscuous teenagers. We know that kids who are sexually promiscuous, generally speaking, are less well-adjusted than kids who aren't. And that's a little different from occasional healthy experimentation. But clearly, there is a difference. Now, the friends with benefits thing, That's kind of a new term that kids have coined.
I wonder if a lot of that
Sometimes
is bravado too.
it is,
this
but
friends with
adults assume
benefits.
friends with benefits, oh, they're going all the way. Not necessarily. It might mean practicing kissing or hugging or
As
dancing
one of our
close.
teens, it's like trying
Yeah.
out golf clubs and knowing which ones work for you when the real thing comes around. I'm like, okie dokie.
There you go.
All right, Claire from Virginia writes, many of today's parents are baby boomers who fear being seen as old or old-fashioned. Is the desire to remain cool causing parents to create a climate of acceptance for any behavior deemed hot? What a great question. I mean, I hate to blame baby boomer parents, but is there a certain attitude they have? They don't want their kids to grow up because, God forbid, that means they're getting older too, and they're not really accepting the responsibility that goes with really dealing with these issues?
Absolutely. I think I love that question, because the hardest part of what I do is try to talk parents who are really grew up as teenagers in the 70s, who really didn't think about sexually transmitted diseases, who read a lot about their kids, about psychologically how to help their development. And really the bottom line is that the baby boomers are very intimidated by their kids, and they shouldn't be, and they're afraid to really kind of lay down the law with the kids. But the truth is, it makes kids feel loved when you tell them.
When you set limits.
Exactly.
But also, you want to be friends with your kids. It's very confusing
but-
because they're not
Yeah.
going to open up to you unless you do feel close, and yet, it's so confusing.
But being cool doesn't necessarily make you a good parent. In fact, a lot of kids say, I hate it when my mom and dad try to act so
They do.
cool.
Oh, yeah.
Why can't they act their age?
Yeah, it's embarrassing,
It is
really.
embarrassing.
Anyway, stick around, relax, enjoy our lovely sofa, because when we come back, we're going to answer some more email questions, and we're going to also talk to some teens we've gathered here in our studio, so it should be interesting.
Great.
Neil's like, yeah. We'll be back right after this.